Hello, and thank you for choosing to watch another New Life video. I'm Matt with New Life Church. We're continuing our series of the heroes of faith talked about in Hebrews 11. We're talking about Joseph, and we're starting with chapter 41 of Genesis. You may recall that Joseph, when he was younger, he was very visibly and obviously favored by his father, including being given a great coat of many colors. And he talked about dreams that God gave him, about how he would rule over his family, over his brothers, over his parents. And that this provoked his brothers. They acted a lot worse than what was justified, but he did kind of rub their faces in it. So they jumped him, and they made it look like he was dead, sold him to be a slave in Egypt. And things were starting to work out in the house of Potiphar. He was the head servant there. And then Potiphar's wife wanted him, and he resisted the temptation, and so she told everyone, including her husband, that he tried to rape her. So he got thrown in prison and continued serving the Lord through that. That's the amazing thing. He had some problems in his youth, but he served the Lord. And he's still serving the Lord in prison. And then the butler and the baker are thrown in prison there. They each have a dream, and Joseph interprets the dreams. The chief baker was hanged, whereas the chief butler was restored to his former position with the Pharaoh. Joseph had asked him, when you go back to Pharaoh, when you're restored, remember me, talk to Pharaoh about me, try to get me out of this place. I don't belong here. Please. And so that baker, or that butler, verse 23 of chapter 40 says, yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So, the day after that butler left the prison, Joseph is waking up thinking, I wonder if today I'm going to be taken out of this prison. Nothing happened. The next day, it'll be today, I'm sure of it. Nothing happened. The next day, for 2 years. I admire a lot about Joseph, about how he kept steadily serving God through all these difficulties. It seemed every time things seemed to be going his way, the other shoe would drop, something bad would happen. But he kept on serving God anyway. After being sold into slavery by my brothers, maybe I would be discouraged. I don't know. That never happened to me. After serving God through that, and then when things are starting to go right, being accused of attempted rape, thrown into prison, you wouldn't blame anybody for saying, you know what, forget this. Serving God doesn't help any. It's not worth it. I don't know, for me now. But no. He was so good that he was put in charge of his part of the prison. And with those butler and baker, their dreams, he's the one who went to them. He said, boy, you guys look upset. You're, like something's wrong. What is it? Would I have cared enough? I don't know. Never been in that situation. But now here, it's been 2 years. So chapter 41 begins. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. And behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. That's a weird dream. That's a weird dream. Now, verse 5 said, have you ever had a weird dream? You wake up, it's still the middle of the night, and he managed to go to sleep this time. Sometimes you can have a bad dream and just not be able to go back to sleep. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you're able, but he slept and dreamed a second time. And suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. You think it was weird seeing thin cows eating cows? These are heads of grain devouring the others. Makes you wonder what he drank before he went to bed. But, So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. I don't know what I'd think if I dreamed that. Watching that is disturbing. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. Yeah, I'd be troubled from that. I'd probably go see a doctor. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. He wanted to know what this means. Dream interpretation is still something that some people try to do, and it's certainly not an exact science. So he wanted to know what it meant, and being the Pharaoh, he can call people to try to tell him. He can call everybody to try to tell him. So all these guys are being called, and verse 9, then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day. I mean, can you imagine him? He's just a butler, but he's hearing what's going on, and all of a sudden, you ever forgotten something important? And then suddenly something reminds you, it's like, oh no! So he admits it's his fault. I remember my faults this day. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker, we each had a dream in one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. It came to pass, just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. So he's telling the Pharaoh all about it. And Pharaoh is probably hanging on every word. He really wants someone who can interpret his dream. He wants to know the truth. He wants to know what is going on. He doesn't just want some charlatan to make up something. So now he's hearing this, and this guy was right twice before. He'll be right again. So verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved, changed his clothing, and came to Pharaoh, since, of course, Pharaoh can't know that there are people who have less than good clothes, who aren't as groomed as he is. He can't know that. You know, there are some kings where you're not even allowed to frown in their presence. I would think that he'd be pulled forward, but got to get them all cleaned up before he goes before Pharaoh. So, Nehemiah was worried that he was in big trouble for not looking happy when he was brought before his king in Nehemiah chapter 1. But, so, he's all changed and looking good now. So he could be brought before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So what do we learn from this so far? It's been 2 years. Joseph is still following God. He didn't say, I used to be able to do that, but I saw what serving God does. I did that, and you know what your butler did? He just forgot about me. Serving God has gotten me nothing but trouble, nothing but hardship. I really don't understand how someone who reads the Bible could ever believe the prosperity gospel that you always will get everything you want. Which I don't know how they can believe that. If I believed it, probably within a week, I wouldn't believe it because something would have gone wrong in my life. But Joseph was an extreme case. He's a wonderful example of serving God through all the hardships. He's still there. He's still serving God. Still giving glory to God. He didn't say, that's right. I'm the one who can interpret your dreams. Let's make a deal. But he's saying God will give Pharaoh an answer, not sell. Okay. Here's the deal. You get me out of this prison for good. And I'll tell you anything you want to hear. Verse 17. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream, I stood on the bank of the river. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I awoke. And also I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. Then behold, 7 heads, withered and thin and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. So he told them his dream, and added, no one else has been able to explain it. That's why you've been called. Excuse me. So Joseph answered, what did you drink before you went to bed? Or what did you eat? No. Verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. So first of all, he's saying, okay, these are the same. They are the same, and I would think that the magicians could have figured that out. even if they don't have any idea what it is.
Yeah.
7 gaunt and ugly, 7 ugly and blighted, 7 good and healthy, and 7 good and healthy. That much they should have figured out.
Yep.
Doesn't say they did, and I'd guess they probably didn't, but I think that part would be obvious. So verse 28, this is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. Okay, that part sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't it? I'd love to get 7 years of plenty.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 30, but after them 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. That ain't good.
Mm-mm.
So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. And you know, that's the truth. When things start going bad, you can't even remember the good anymore. You can't.
Yeah.
You can't remember the feeling of it. You might possibly remember that it was good, but you can't get that excitement or happiness or contentment, because all you're thinking about is all the terrible things that have happened, and all of us have had one thing after another happen to us at one time or another. That's one little thing to remember. We need to count our blessings, even in the bad times. We need to remember how we have been blessed. It's very easy to forget that when you're going through a hard time. And there will be hard times. There have been hard times.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to remember how blessed we are. It will be very severe. Verse 32. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. He told it to you twice so that you would take this seriously and make sure you prepare for it. It's established by God.
Mm-hmm.
And then Joseph does something he wasn't actually asked to do. Nevertheless, it turned out to be a good thing to do. He gives advice. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land, for the 7 years of famine which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. Sounds like a good idea. That's a good idea in general when things are good, to save up. You know, because there will be a rainy day. So he's given this advice. He's even got an exact figure he wants, 1/5. So he's saying, very good advice. You're going to get a lot, so gather it up, store it, so that it's ready for those bad years. So, verse 37, so the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And that just means they were reasonable people. If you believe that prophecy, which they did, that seems like the only reasonable thing to do. You know, and so it was good in their eyes, in everybody's eyes. Verse 38, and Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? I could just see him looking around. I think we got the guy right here. I mean,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he recognized the Spirit of God in him. He's just saying, we ain't gonna find anyone better. This guy right here. let's see what it is. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you." I mean, Pharaoh just spent all day talking to all these magicians and wise men of Egypt. They couldn't tell him what his dream was. Joseph interpreted the dream and gave him good advice. He's already checked out all the discerning people in Egypt that very day. You know? No one is discerning and wise as you. Verse 40. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. That's quite a promotion, wouldn't you say? Mm-hmm. From prisoner to vice pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed them in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, "Bow the knee." So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in the land of Egypt." That's quite a
Wow.
that's quite a directive. If he doesn't want them to lift their hand or their foot, what he's basically saying is they can't do anything. If you don't like what they're doing, you can just have them thrown in prison. Or worse. But yeah, that's quite a lot of authority. Verse 45, and Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him a wife, Asenath, which is an Egyptian name meaning belonging to the goddess Neth, or Neith, however it's pronounced. The daughter of Potipharah, which means he whom Ra, the sun god, gave. She's the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. I mean, what was he before? Before all this started? Something like 19, I think, or 17, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but, so he's been there quite some time already. When he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Now in the 7 plentiful years the ground brought forth abundantly. In other words, it was not a movie about farmers. Any that I've seen, no matter what happens, something's going to happen to the crop. It won't grow up, or it'll be flooded out before it can be harvested, or there'll be a hailstorm or locusts or anything. And any of these movies or TV shows that I've seen, it's like there's never been a harvested crop in the history of the world. But if it is harvested, the barn's going to burn before you sell it. You know? That's their idea of drama, is make it look like they worked all year long for nothing. So, verse 48, so he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. He had in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Joseph gathered very much grain, as the sand of the sea, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. So he's got a lot of grain. So much he couldn't even keep track of it. Verse 50, and to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years the famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. So, literally making forgetful. For God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, which literally means fruitfulness. For God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. You know, as I said before, when bad things are going on, it's hard to remember the good. At the same time, when good is going on, you can't remember the bad as much, as strongly. You know, when you're feeling healthy, you can remember that you were in pain before, or that you were sick before, but how bad it was, you can't quite really make yourself remember it, or at least I've never been able to. You know, I can remember it was bad, and then if I'm in pain again, then oh yeah, this is like back then. But when you're feeling good, it's hard to really remember the pain or the sorrow. Just when you're confronted with it again, then you remember it real quick. Verse 53, then the 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended. And the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. The famine was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. We need bread, we need bread. So then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, do. The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all lands. So Joseph was faithful to God during all this time. And he's prospered now. He's at this point, it's been over 7 years since he was a prisoner. Longer than that, since he was in the house of Potiphar. Longer than that. Mm-hmm. He hasn't seen his family for a very long time. I wonder if he's thinking about those dreams at this point. I mean, I could think of being in the prison, and there thinking about these dreams he'd had that he'd rule his family, and oh yeah, I wonder what I ate before I went to bed. Was I sick?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think of all those lonely nights.
Yeah.
But in the next lesson, we'll see him reunited with his family. Because, as it said, the famine was severe in all lands. And his family is in one of those lands. But now Joseph is being blessed, and he's got his wife and kids instead of the prison. You know, he's doing well. He's got authority, respect, power. Now, mind you, God doesn't give all that to everybody. God has raised up specific people as he sees fit. Sometimes, not all of us are going to go from prisoner to the vice president. You know, but God will be with you. Be faithful to God, and you'll find out what His plan for your life is. Might not be as grand a scale as Joseph's, or maybe it is. But God does have a plan for everybody. We just need to stay faithful. Stay faithful to God. Even when we're disappointed time after time. Just keep being faithful. Be like Joseph. Hope this has been a blessing to you. If it has, please like, share, comment, subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. Our phone number and email address, and of course the comment boxes are all there on the internet. So until next time, go with God.